So as many of you guys, I come from a development background. Just a quick hands up, how many people write code every other day? That's close to 100%, I think, very, very close. So this is where I come from too, and what I do every other day when I don't do product management or evangelism, right? And many things about SOA, and especially for a company like Oracle, are about the idea that SOA has a lot to do with XML and coding and everybody else. Anything else, right? How many people write web services today, use Axis or whatnot else? So just keep your hands up. How many people believe that SOA? Basically 100% of the guys that write web services. And so today what I want to focus about, which is sort of pretty unusual for what Oracle in general does and the core technology company, I want to drive your thoughts a little bit beyond that and way beyond that idea that SOA is about technology. When I went out to customers, one of a these days really good friend and at that point very escalated customer, the chief architect of Cable Germany, welcomed me with an interesting word. It's interesting that 30% of SOA are technology and can cause so many problems, but it's nothing compared to the 70% that are human. So just to give you an idea of what I'm going to talk about in the next hour, right? The human aspects to SOA, the roll-up, the skills, the organization, rather than about XML, WSDL, or any other thing. So let's first start, what is SOA? And many people, I bet, have heard about something like that, right? What is service-oriented architecture? Hooray! It's an approach to rationalize enterprise integration, right? Rationalize on integration, getting bits and pieces together, and guess what? Do it in a standard way, right? So to some extent, we could actually say SOA, at least the technical part of it, is standards-based component integration, standards-based component architecture. Enable new breeds of process-driven applications. This is what Rahul talked about, right? A process-driven application, you as user drive a process. Might it be agile, might it be ad hoc, or might it be assemble it together and use it. New leveraging old legacy, bits and pieces you have in your company. Might it be web services, might it be Java, or might it be an SAP system or Oracle applications. Legacy, but enterprise-wide legacy. Key is reuse existing services to build new value. Obviously, right? Standard data formats, standard interfaces, hooray, we all love WSDL. We all love XML. How many people took the time to read things like WSDL 2.0 spec? Plenty of 100,000 pages to read, right? And plenty of joy and fun to try to apply WSDL 2.0 into an enterprise, except keeping developers happy. The business user, and this is what we work for at the end of the day, that funds our IT endeavors. WSDL 2.0, does he really bother? I doubt. So another thought, what is SOA? Again, the vocabulary is taken from the SOA reference architecture and the reference model from Oasis. It says, a service, the means by which the needs of a consumer are brought together with the capabilities of a provider. I, as provider, offer something to fulfill an order. A consumer wants to use that as part of a process, as part of an application. A capability, a real-world effect that the service is able to provide to a service consumer. Real-world value. Any word about WSDL, any word about SOAP, any word about XML? It's capability. Business value. Core competency. SOA, service-oriented architecture, is a paradigm for organizing and utilizing distributed capabilities that may be under the control of different ownership domains. Provides uniform means to offer, discover, and interact with, and last but not least, use capabilities to produce desired effects, consistent with measurable preconditions and expectations. It took 3 years actually to come up with that sentence in the Oasis reference model. Big fight. However, and that's what so many people sort of really associate with SOA, the execution context, the means of communication between the service consumer and the service provider, SOAP, REST, RPC, XML, WSDL. So guess what we do? First takeaway of today's session, when we talk about SOA, we usually talk about the execution context. How many times we talk about a capability that a service provides that is beyond technology, right? So adopting SOA, not just usual, But I would say in 99% of the cases, SOA, service orientation, starts with a project-driven approach. Some R&D, right? Web services are cool to use. We could probably reuse that things. Common services, utility, logging, authentication, whatnot else, right? So project-driven, really IT-focused on producing the quick win. And the management that is funding that R&D is actually pretty skeptical, right? What is the added value of that whole junk? It's great because it's bringing you a lot of cool new technologies, whistle, soap, whatnot. Management-wise, it brings you a bunch of web services. The other part of the world is it's infrastructure-driven, right? It's driven by consolidation, driven by the idea we want to consolidate, we want to crack down on reuse, we want to have one database for customers and not 20, and, right? Basically, around the idea, reduce cost. And management has not bought into this. Management has bought into the idea, hooray, we want to do cost saving, but that's it. The other part is to drive it enterprise-wide. It's not just the idea of, yes, there has to be IT. And God, I mean, what do we want to implement if we don't have IT and do Spring and whatnot else and implement some really cool junk? On the other side, at that point, you talk about transforming an organization. You talk about really providing services. You talk about cracking down silos. How many people work in organizations today that have large-scale departments and IT underneath the covers? Couple. Service orientation, right? Today, most of the companies are silo-oriented. Every silo has its own customer base, and it's sort of a little mafia game, right? If you're not nice, you don't get my information, and if you're nice, you get mine and I get yours. So now we talk about consolidation, right? We talk about SOA, we talk about transformation, metrics. Guess what? Somebody, and probably 80% of the guys, will lose power because suddenly the mafia game is not working anymore. So I guess it gives some sort of idea why adoption strategies enterprise-wide are so hard to do. And it seldomly gets beyond this, hooray, we have web services, hooray, we have people, hooray, we have XML, right? To go towards the real big value and to go also towards the real big work. Creating a people process with all the tools Oracle and SAP and whatnot else provide, it's a no-brainer. Creating a Java application or a web service with Access, it's a no-brainer. Transforming an organization from silo to metrics, this is work. This is challenge. And actually, if you do it wrong, can kill the organization. So let's look into this really 3 adoption strategies that I talked about and what they truly bring as SOA benefits, right? So we talked about enterprise-driven, right? The holy grail, but obviously the biggest amount of work. And very seldomly you have the first project being something that is enterprise-driven. You very often start out of ideas kickstarted from an IT perspective. What is the enabler project? How can we generate value? And how easy can it be? How fast can I deliver a dashboard to my management and say, listen, green, red, this is your company, this is your key process, that's it. Very driven out of fast-track technology, assembly, reuse of services. Infrastructure-driven, you end up with utility services, right? Because the infrastructure offers you utility on logging, on authentication, on authorization, on security. Do you really end up with business services? Seldomly. Another thing, if you go project-driven, and that's obviously the smallest part, very tactical, I go forward to deliver and show my manager, yes, it's cool that we do web services. But keep in mind, this is 99% to kickstart a SOA project. I've not seen a single project all around the world and with every customer I've worked that would not have started as a little pet project in the IT, where they said, you know, that's really cool, we can quickly assemble, we can reduce integration cost and make integration standards-based. How many people in the room use Beeple? Cool, right? Simple to use, fairly simple to use, it's XML-based, no coding if you don't misuse it, fairly nice to do integration. And the best of all, it's standards-based. But on the other side, now you get integration, right? You get a process. How many people have linked that process that you guys built in Beeple to an enterprise process? How many people can go from that little process up to the value chain in the enterprise where it really provides value and figure out how much value it provides? Anybody? And this is exactly where we are in the enterprise world, right? And not in the project world, where we have a couple of processes that are high value. Don't get me wrong, they create a lot of value. On the other side of the world, there's so much more you can do. So, 3 different things, right? And obviously they buy you different things. The only problem with it is pain. The pain when you go with enterprise SOA is called investment. It's called investment of resources, investment of money. What you gain with it is a real rigid structure, a rigid methodology, a rigid governance structure. And if you want to do governance in SOA projects, you can use all sorts of fancy tools. Providers like Oracle, BEA, SAP provide you with governance suites, right? Service repositories, service registries. Find your services, know where they are. However, the key is seldomly the right software. The key is the whiteboard where everybody is forced to go to and look up that service. And the other key is this one guy with this really large stick that really hurts to make sure that people follow that methodology. And this is the value, right? The initial service delivery of enterprise-wide SOA is very high because you create all the things, you set up the methodology, you do service identification, you drill down on processes, you define your services, and whatnot else. On the technical world, project-driven, right? The initial service delivery, no problem. The reuse of those services, and we'll see it later, it's very small because they are technical driven. They are driven out of the need to produce something very quickly. So the subsequent service governance requires increased cost and effort because obviously you drive it out of an idea. Out of the idea, I have to deliver return on invest now. Project-driven SOA, we talked about it, so I don't want to go too much into it, is really about the idea, little involvement from the business side. We want to kickstart it, we want to show, hooray, there is value. We want to sort of align us back and prove to business, yes, you can dig into your process, you can see your processes, it's really great. And it allows us at the end of the day to make sure that business doesn't have to wait a year to get some requirement, right? People, all the other things, quick reassembly, quick orchestration of services, a lot of value. The scope of that thing is obviously restricted to projects, seldomly to programs. How many people of you guys that implemented people talked with more than one other departments and this process is spanning departments? 1, 2, 3, 4. Out of the, I think, 30 that raised their hands. I guess, pretty proven point. Project-oriented, right? Department-oriented. But there it provides value, a lot of value. Usually it's integration and data management focused. Shuffling data from A to B, fixing some sort of integration need, fixing point-to-point integrations that are super hard and coded today in PL SQL, in Java, whatnot else. Everything from scratch build in new projects, we can do it and we want to prove we can do it fast. It's seldomly focused on reuse. I have seen many projects that started off there and in the next project they said like, oh, so it's about reuse, but where are all my services? Because initial focus was deliver that one project. No bother about reuse. No bother about what are the services I could truly use in my enterprise, right? But about a couple services that are valid and viable to my project. So there are some cost savings because it's standards-based. There are some cost savings because of other reasons, quick assembly, learning curve and skills. But the downfalls are obvious, right? And I don't want to walk you through all of them. But the key thing here, missing reusable business services. You, at the end of the day, come up with an adapter that offers you an API. This is not a reusable business service, right? But it's a good start to develop skills, to develop backing in management, to develop management confidence. Project integration, very, very often about something like that. Integration between two systems, very small, people flow, enterprise service bus flow, whatsoever you call it, right? Replicate orders across systems, do data pump, sort of enterprise application integration 2.0. At best, it's standards-based integration. And hooray, I find a couple of web services. And if I do it fancy in Spring and whatnot else, great. But this is project SOA at its best. How many departments does it touch? One, maybe two, right? I want to shuffle an order from my one box into another box. Not much real core value to business. They finally get reduced stuff and are not that bad to speak on IT, because IT can finally deliver a solid integration. If something goes wrong, I have something I can look into. Great. So here's an actually interesting thing. One of our partners did that project. And the idea was, hooray, we want to go for SOA, we want to leverage standards, and the results were the sales team moving towards a single site for sales information. Single site for sales information. What is this? Classical consolidation of information, right? Good thing was, and this is what they wanted to achieve and achieved, a foundation for future SOA projects. And at that point, when you go project level SOA and you think beyond that point of quick delivery, you build up, and you can build up a really cool foundation for future projects. Key here is enterprise architecture is partnering with other IT teams. First step of SOA, of organization SOA, talk to each other rather than just build something strange in IT. Organizational issues, gain confidence in event-based real-time business processing. Well, you know where they came from? They came from badge orientation. And suddenly, someone tells them, you know what? Badge orientation is cool, but we can do that real time. So guess how many developers that love badges and wrote C++ code and COBOL code believed in the idea that event-based is way better, right? Key here is communication. It's one of the key things of SOA. You will spend hours and hours and hours and hours talking to people and trying to convince them of the idea that there is value down the road. They learned a couple of lessons. While an adapter is great, or the generation of access into a web service endpoint, it introduces quite another few issues. So while on the first shot it might look like, great, I have an adapter for SAP or Oracle, on the second thought, it might introduce actually more issues than you have thought firsthand. Second one, well, standard is great, but standard and interop are two different things. How many people have tried the gimmicks trying to get Microsoft speaking to an Access web service? Windows Communication Framework trying to use Access 2. You will both support the same standard, no? You will see all sorts of fancy errors. Standards are good, but standards and interop between two large-scale organizations, whew. Standard does not mean it works out of the box. Anyway, key takeaway, when you go for a project like this, and this is what they learned, plug and play is what you want to go to, right? Rahul talked about the idea of assembling services, orchestrating bits and pieces together. But don't expect it to be like a straight journey when you go large scale, where you plug and play services together and everything works from day one. We all wish we would go that way, and we go forward. That's definitely what Oracle and SAP invest money into, to make exactly that plug and play going. On the other side, there is still way to go. So takeaway from project-wide SOA, it's about integration, it's about standards-based. Is it truly about services? Services that my company provides? I guess the answer is pretty obvious. How many people know Thomas Earl in the room? So Thomas Earl is considered one of the gods of SOA, of modern-day SOA. When it comes to patterns, when it comes to design principles, is literally sort of the gang of four to some extent for SOA, for technical SOA implementation, right? And I just want to read through what he said in his famous book, Principles of the Service Design. It's tough to incrementally adopt SOA when you're delivering services tactically, project-driven, right? Out of an IT project. Because each tactical delivered service essentially becomes legacy once SOA is properly adopted. One single little service that you created that is an adapter. The role in your enterprise, when you adopt enterprise-wide SOA, very questionable. Very about how much can we really reuse policies. Because having an adapter that exposes me one select statement whatsoever, right? Very tied down to the fields I need. Either I rewrite it every time because some new agency comes and tells me I need 5 other fields, or I design it in the first shot so large scale that it takes me 500 days to implement. Project-driven approaches deliver now. Infrastructure-driven SOA. We talked about it, right? Consolidation, master data management. The good thing here is when you go for integration on the infrastructure side, standardize on a SOA platform. How many people don't work for an IT core competency organization in the room? Banks, whatever, right? That is not an IT company. Anybody? What do you think the guy or your company believes in or is happy when you finally have a SOA platform that consists of best of breed? Now finally your hard value processes are on that thing, something cracks, and you try, because of best of breed, try to find where the error is. I guess they will be seldomly really happy about that fact, right? You have enough value and work to do with SOA rather than to plug infrastructure components from different organizations together. Standardize on it. And it doesn't matter if it's Oracle or anybody else. Standardize on the thing rather than go best of breed. Although we all love, right, open source, plug and play, we put things together. On the enterprise side, when we talk about what I just told you for the last 20 minutes, so much work to do. Do you really want to dig into where the error just comes by and try to find the right guy to talk to? I doubt. Oh, I mean, one of the downfalls is everything that is about infrastructure requires a lot of buy-in. And buy-in is equal to buy-in from management, but also buy-in in money terms. Infrastructure is never uncostly or cheap. Well, big fight. Ownership over platform and utility services. Don't forget, these guys power your SOA. And political fights over and over. You will see that when you try it. Interestingly enough, and that's sort of this big dilemma we are in when you come from the integration and infrastructure-wide SOA, right? One part is operations. They go about capacity planning, they go about service level agreements, they go about policies, they go about provisioning. On the other side, SOA as program is about providing value. Who is owning those services, right? Lifecycle governance, shared artifacts. So there's a pretty big discrepancy between, hooray, here's hardware and here's boxes and here's provisioning, and on the other side, services, who governs them, how are they governed, how is the life cycle? That is usually fairly independent from the life cycle of a box, because that's why we create SOA, no? We want to be able to shift services, plug services, consolidate them without having to bother, please, Mr. DBA, please move me my little piece, otherwise I'm dead tomorrow morning. Really big discrepancy. Another thing, when you think about infrastructure, right? First thing when I created those slides was thinking around the fact of mainframe, the idea of I want to deploy something agile, I want to be agile. How many people work with a mainframe? How fast can you deploy something on that mainframe? I remember there's this interesting process, you have to validate this, validate 50 other things. Agility? Question mark. Takeaway, infrastructure-wide SOA, pure technology, pure supporting technology. There is no organizational stuff, nothing. This is pure technology. Enterprise-driven SOA. Of course, this requires buy-in. How many people want to do enterprise SOA in the next 5 years? How many people of you know about organizational behavior? You other guys, I can only recommend you, get started on learning it. Because you will see, and I had the pleasure of working with a lot of architects from different companies, chief architects, CXOs, and most of them came at some point back. Now we have all the technology in place, right? It's all working. It generates money, it generates revenue. But where is the real true potential? We want to go after transforming the organization. Can you help us as partners? So if you want to sort of a little bit go out of the idea being a core technologist, as I used to be, get familiar with ideas around how organizations work, behaviors change, what is a matrix, how is a matrix working. These are the things, and I strongly believe, and Oracle strongly believes in the idea, that over the next couple of years, this whole idea of what IT is and how can it help will change. Change from pure technologists towards a real architect role and being able to advise on change, on things that are not what is the latest standard of Whistle. Although I have to agree, it's plenty of fun, and I love doing it. So enterprise-centric does not mean enterprise-wide. There's a whole different story, right? Enterprise-centric, everything around the idea of, hooray, this is it, we don't want to bother, it's just important to have it, my enterprise is in the middle and business decides. Enterprise-wide is talking to departments, consolidating on departments, right? Well, perform cross-project planning and funding. This is where it gets into politics, right? How many people tried to implement in the last 10 years some sort of common object model for the enterprise? How many people succeeded? Big fight. Get 7 people in the room from 7 different departments and have them agree what the customer is. The only approach and recommendation I can give you is lock them in there and every once in a while get them some new fresh water. And hopefully after a month, either they're all dead or you have a common object model. Feed into them what is cool, but agree on something. It's not implementing, everybody implementing something else. How cool do you think it is in the people process? If one thing fails, you get an Axis fault, and on the next step you get some MSN error message. Best of breed, but I doubt that will big benefit, right? Well, enact as much governance as required. Governance is an interesting story here, because governance is not just the usual, you know, when you're allowed to deploy, what you're allowed to deploy. It's also, what are the services? What is the planning of the service portfolio? The services that really, truly support my enterprise. And usually we think in, yeah, they are derived from what we have today on objects, what we have today on operations. And Axis and many other web service stacks provide you tools, Java to Whistle. How many people use Java to Whistle? Do you guys think that you get true services when you expose a Java object as web service? You get APIs. You get wrapped RPC APIs. And there is a whole big difference between a wrapped RPC operation and a service. And I will go actually a little bit more, especially into that idea. If you think about it from beyond technology. If we think SOA is about technology only, we talk about API enablement. But services are at a way higher level, way less granular level. Downfalls, this is big investment. I mean, no doubt. Everybody who tells you enterprise-wide SOA is a half-year program that costs a couple $100,000, kick him out the door. Ridiculous, right? On the other side, governance is not about democracy. There is going to be dictatorship. At some point, you have to make the decision. Otherwise, you sit there in 5 years and nothing has changed. The other thing, well, there is cost associated with all that junk, and we talked about that. The question is, what is the revenue model? What is the model of corporate investment into that thing, and how are departments charged? What about service level agreements, right? If I'm the manufacturing department and half of the SOA infrastructure is not working, I'll lose money. If I want to have that SLA, there's better a model of how I pay to get that quality right. Well, and it works best with changes in methodology. And this is the big thing. Organizational SOA and enterprise-wide SOA without methodology is pretty prone to failure. So today, when you start off, you usually end up with some sort of conceptual service portfolio, right? You've done your homework, you went from processes down to services and whatnot else. Well, at some point, you hopefully have a concrete service portfolio, and a couple of those guys, the really important ones that you go after reuse and go after usage, are implemented. This is now. In 12 months, hopefully, your conceptual portfolio went significantly down, and you have a bunch of really implemented, more implemented services, right? In 18 months, you have the key services all together, right? And the key here is, the better you plan upfront, the better you plan your service portfolio on the concept level through a methodology, the less pain you have later with overlap, with redundancy, and everything else. It's the same thing when you do Java coding today at the end of the day, right? When you have two guys sitting next to each other and don't think going the agile extreme, let's go and hack some code together, chances are actually fairly good that you have two different loggers, two different other things, 5 different security devices, and whatnot else, right? When you provide services that a whole company should reuse, and not just the IT guy next to you, the importance of planning, way bigger, way, way bigger. Plenty of stuff, and I don't want to walk you through all of those bubbles and what you can do with them, because otherwise we sit here tomorrow morning. The key, and just keep in mind, when you see that picture, this is enterprise-driven SOA, right? Financial impacts, portfolio, planning, operations, technology. Technology is one little bubble there out of 8, and people. SOA is about people, and enterprise-wide SOA is even more about people and less about technology. Although technology is cool. Technology is really a lot of fun. How many people have heard of Helio? Helio is one of those really cool companies that are producing cell phones and also want to get away from a phone as a phone idea. While as Apple goes, it's the iPhone that can do all sorts of fancy gimmicks. Helio advertises with, don't call me a phone. Call me a collection, a mashup of services that you can use on Helio, whether it's 3G, GSM, where are you, what presence and whatnot else. The true value, a mashup of services, right? So, well, what was the idea there? They started off with an integration project, getting things together, right? Obviously it's a startup, and a startup has to produce money. Has to really, I mean, the goal of a startup is not to burn money, but to get ready for an IPO. Return on invest, obviously, right? So the key is, how can we deliver something very quick that lowers significantly our integration costs in telco? So very fast go-to-market, very important go-to-market. Okay, started off as an integration project and evolved into reusing components across the enterprise, because they managed what a lot of people don't get done. To provide services, although a little bit more work in the beginning, that are really reused to the enterprise. And their pet project they started off with was a key process to the enterprise, and not a process that no one really needs, to just proving the value of people. And this is a very key element of what you can do if you pick the right project for your enabler, the right process. No one wants you to pick, if you're in a manufacturing company, to pick the master manufacturing process. If you fail, the whole company fails. But pick something that has significant value to the company and that is visible. At the end, a bunch of managers sitting in a boardroom have to buy into and invest money, right? Time to market, we talked about that. The key here was innovative technology partner implemented with Helio. When working with startup companies, architect and develop processes closest to the backend system first. So the key here is, if you're a startup, if you're web-based, a lot of this web stuff changes. And how many people have heard and read about the recent change of Facebook in architecture? Facebook is literally rewriting the whole front office. If you're a startup, you screw ideas and rewrite things in days, in months, every month, just to get it right, just to make it ready. Usually, the infrastructure is quite stable. Fairly big investment, fairly stable boxes, fairly stable enterprise software. So the more you come from the infrastructure side and build on top of that, the better it's going to be, right? So key takeaway here is, when you work with a startup or when you work with something where you have rapid change, go from the infrastructure, because the infrastructure is the thing that changes slowest. Takeaway, enterprise-wide SOA, process-centric, governance throughout the enterprise. This is the real deal. This is the real investment, but this is also the real deal. So when you start off, and there's this wonderful model that Accenture originally came up with, and we worked with them a little bit on, 5 levels of SOA, right? You start off very opportunistic. Tactical is, hooray, we use people, hooray, we do standards, hooray, we expose things through adapters. Strategically, It's really SOA focused on being a simple and very effective quick win. I want to prove that an investment into new technology is cool. Not a lot of SOA, but a good foundation. Level 2, tactically, you apply SOA to simple integration projects. You deploy your first service management. You do initial SOA planning. Strategy-wise, you start applying SOA to your project portfolio. You think beyond one project, beyond one little integration. You think in programs. What I'm doing for the next 12 months, what are my projects that I'm going to fund, and how can they be applied to SOA, right? How can SOA, principles, ideas, and planning can be applied to those things? On the third level, it's going to be enterprise-wide. SOA focused on business process automation and improvement. Here is where the value comes. Here is where you get to the point of consolidating down on really enabling an agile enterprise. And here is where you finally get together. Here is my processes that my enterprise and my chief architects want, my business wants, my business process of an order to be manufactured, and on the other side of the world, here's the implementation to it. If he says, I want to have these 3 actions being totally different, here you can map it, right? Here you see drill down from my value added chain down to, guess what? Your implementation. You can measure. Once you go measure, you can go after optimize, and I really don't want to go way more into that. The more you have exposed on services, the more you can measure your processes, the more you can drive value from that measure and help the things optimize. Last but not least, this is when SOA is industrialized. So this is the holy grail of an organization that is service-oriented. Everything that you do, everything that you believe in, every project you plan, every program you plan fits into SOA, fits into your strategy. SOA has become your strategy. SOA has become your choice of implementation. You are, as company, service-oriented. Not to be mixed with, hooray, my company is a bunch of web services. Your company offers services to outside customers. I guess this is something you have already guessed. Where are those things? So even if you go enterprise-wide, you're somewhere in the middle of the Holy Grail. Okay, that's it. You reached level 5, and your company is service-oriented after, whatever, a couple of years. There's another thought to it. And when I came through a book that was written by InnoQ and one of the chief architects of InnoQ, totally different view of service orientation. Think of it that way. Services are a landscape of your company. The service orientation and the service-oriented architecture of your company is a landscape of how your company does business. What core competencies do you have? What is the real deal of your company, right? Manufacturing, deliver. What is the mission? Deliver, manufacture high-quality goods on time. What are supporting functions? The conversion from plan to manufacturing, right? The email that I get from my customer saying, here's the CAD plan to manufacture on time, the first time, right. 100% to spec. Processes that span and orchestrate above these above competencies, right? These are your business processes. From the customer call to the delivered product. I want, here's my email, and at some point we ship you what you ask for on time. This is a process. This is not the people process that shuffles orders from A to B. This is your business process. And here you see, I think, very, very well what project level SOA is and what enterprise-wide thinking SOA is. SOA as strategy. I provide services as company. Obviously, they have to implement. The last thing I want is that you go out of this session and think like, God damn it, I'm totally useless because SOA is about some weird whatever anyway. Obviously, all these things have to be implemented. My idea and the thing that I want to give you and let you go with is the idea that SOA is way more than technology. Defining your services. First of all, what? What is the thing doing in the context of my business? What is the scope of it? How many people ask that question when they used Access to generate the whistle? Who are the guys or other services that use that thing? For everybody who is familiar with UML, the actors. Why? Why do we need that thing? Is it really helpful, or is it just a legacy thing for my mafia game that someone really drives value from personally? And last but not least, how? What is the process that orchestrates all those what's, all those services, all those competencies? But also look into what are the implementation details. What are the exception cases, right? If I want to manufacture that stuff and I forgot to call my outsource supplier, not gonna work, right? I can have all my machines at hand. I can have my whole plan at hand. If I don't have goods, bad luck. So these 4 questions are stolen and borrowed from the Enterprise SOA Adoption Strategies book I talked about. If you want to read a nice book that is 100 pages long, really, really valuable. So discovery of services from a totally different angle. Discover your services top down. When you look at the structure, which department and where it is in the chain, how many people were sort of reorganized in the last 2 years? Moved from one department to another one, got new managers, something was changed, got manager, changed. A couple. Okay, where I work and in Europe, you get the new manager, the structure is gone. Structure is something that is unstable. Structure is something that is volatile. Focus on the function. What is this department doing? You develop software for, I don't know, a project, whatever. Do you really care what the structure of that thing is? How hierarchical it is? How flat it is? And derive value from there? No. Look at what the core function of that thing is. Rather than looking at the process, look at the what's first. We talked about what being the first question. When you look at the process, you lose yourself very early and very quickly in the little exception case, because in that little case that is 1% out of 100 others, there has to be an exception case and we need to tackle that thing. So you lose this view on the whole, because you drill into these little exception cases, and this is where you lose yourself. And we've seen that actually. Many people evangelize, oh, we go SOA top down, we go process, and at the end of the day when we ask them what you've accomplished in the year, well, we have discovered all our exception cases. Do you have a process? Well, we eventually will get there. So, takeaway on all of this is, ask the what's first. What are these things for? What are they doing? Services, there are virtual services, and here we go towards implementation. A collection of internal services, right? I might have a stock ticker service if I work in a bank. I have a trading portal that is a facade, a mashup of services, and I have support services. These are capabilities that are needed from implementation, but totally unknown to the business, right? Does my business truly care about what idea of authorization and authentication I use? What LDAP server? I doubt. They are happy if they know that there is some sort of authorization. And technical support services such as RFID junk, right? So these are the 4 large granularity pieces to service-oriented architecture. Conclusion, I asked the same question that I asked in the beginning of my talk. What is SOA? Again, it's about services. It's about your company's core competences. And it's not about Whistle. Whistle is a description of something that might be a service eventually. It's not about the fancy technology, although at some level, you probably go after implementing it. And then you're going to implement at least some services. And I encourage you to do so, because otherwise I would get pretty bored too. Don't get stuck in the we do people and web services, hence we do SOA trap. We do people is, yes, we do integration. Yes, we orchestrate services. But is this enterprise-wide SOA? And attention, this is one of the big attentions, right? Be aware, when you're part of an enterprise-wide SOA strategy, SOA might lead to the change of your organizational culture and not just the structure. Structure being, hooray, you change from a silo into metrics. But what if your values change? The values of the company. You provide services, you become service-oriented. This is when literally the foundation of the enterprise changes. This is where you have guys from PwC, from Roland Berger, doing consulting, right? And every change, there's this wonderful change curve, right? When you start to change, frustration, and you actually, all your things go down, how fast you deliver, what not else, frustration builds up. And eventually at some point this will turn and will go up. And at that point you hopefully are way beyond where you started off. But this little piece will generate frustration, will generate anger, and will not generate too much excitement. Once you reach that point, a lot of excitement will be there, because at that point the company has truly changed to become service-oriented rather than losing money in weird politics and weird mafia tactics. And that's one of the big promises of SOA, as enterprise-wide SOA, rather than technical enablement. With that, a couple things you might want to read through. One is Enterprise SOA Adoption Strategies by Steve Jones. One are the gazillions of white papers on governance for the enterprise. A pretty good one that one of my colleagues wrote is on the Oracle Technology Network, and everything else that is not about the execution context. Thank you very much.